I'm Jody Nordstrom with Lakeville Liquors for another edition of Cellar Notes. We are outside the Summit Brewery in St. Paul. Let's go inside and take a look around. We are here with Damien, the head brewer at Summit Brewery, and he is going to tell us a little bit about the history of Summit.
Well, Jody, thanks very much for coming down today to visit us at the Summit Brewery here in St. Paul. Summit, as you probably know, started back in 1986. It was the brainchild of a gentleman from North Dakota called Mark Sturrett. Mark is still our president and CEO to this day. And Mark really wanted to kind of explore more of a quality approach to making beer. He had traveled quite a bit in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand, and he'd been exposed to some of the more flavoursome beers that at that time were widely available in those parts of the world. Of course, in the United States, there wasn't really a whole lot of options for someone looking for a more assertive, fuller flavoured beer. So Mark said, well, maybe I could do something about that. So with the help of a couple of retired former professional brewmasters, he opened up a small brewery up on University Avenue, right here in St. Paul. And by 1996, that brewery had pretty much reached its capacity in terms of the number of barrels it could produce. It was knocking out about 30,000 beer barrels a year by that stage, about 60,000 standard beer kegs that you might see in a liquor store or at the pub. So they made the decision to break new ground with a brand new brewery here on this piece of land next to the Mississippi River, just south of downtown St. Paul. And this brewery was opened in 1998, and we're about to engage in another expansion here this summer. So currently Summit brews about 115,000 barrels a year. We have about 6 year-round beers. We have 2 of them in our hands right now. This is the Pilsner. This is a classic Czech-style Pils, very traditionally brewed beer. This is one of my favorite beers. It's an oatmeal stout. It's got a little bit more flavor and character than a lager beer, but of course the Pils is very crisp and very clean. Our most famous beer would be the Extra Pale Ale. That's our flagship beer. We've been brewing that since 1986. But we also have a number of other year-round beers. We have our classic British-style India Pale Ale. We also have a new IPA, a new India Pale Ale called Saga. It's more of a West Coast American-style IPA. We have our hybrid Red Ale meets IPA beer. This is called Horizon Red Ale. And then we're just about to come into the spring here, thank God. We can get away from all this cold weather. So we'll be starting to enjoy Maibock quite a bit more. That's our spring season. That's kind of a traditional German-style hearty lager. Kind of good for the Lenten time of year. Our other beer that we have year-round is our Great Northern Porter. That was the second beer that Mark came up with back in 1987. Porter is a great style of beer. It has a lot of roasted characteristics with a little bit of a coffee note in there, but it's quite light in body. It's actually quite refreshing in many ways. So that's roughly the history of Summit. Maybe we should wander back and take a look at the copper kettles and check out the brewing site.
Absolutely, let's go. And we are now on the hot side of the brewery, and Damon is going to explain a little bit what goes on in this room.
Sure, absolutely, Jody. Above us is a huge 6-roller mill. Breweries like Summit use a lot of malted barley and wheat as part of their raw materials to make the beer. So in order to get the sugar out of that wheat and barley, we have to grind it up into a grist, and we do that using a big mill that's right above this mash tun right here. So once we've started milling, we can then send that grist into this mash tun, and we can mix it with hot water. And we create basically a type of porridge, a mash, if you will. And it's going to sit in there for about an hour and a half. And during that time period, the enzymes that exist naturally in the barley will break down the starches in the barley into sugar. And of course, we're all about getting the sugar out of that malting barley. But we need then to separate out that sugar, that what's known as wort, W-O-R-T, in the process. We need to separate that from the grain after we've had that reaction process of creating sugar from starch. And we do that over here with this vessel called a lauter tun.
All right.
So an hour and a half in the mash tun, the enzymes in the malting barley will break down those starches into sugars, and now we're going to separate out that sugary liquid that results from the spent grain. And we do that with our lauter tun right here. The boys are working on it right now because we're during a maintenance shutdown period. But this consists of slotted plates, which are unfortunately not present right now, but this is actually quite rare. You would very rarely see the true bottom of a lauter tun because there's always these slotted plates on top. So we pump over the mash from the mash tun, let it sit on top of the plates, and then we start slowly drawing off that sugary solution, that wort. And we draw it off and move it into our kettle right over here. It takes about 2 hours to draw off all of that liquid material. It's about 5,500 gallons for us here at Summit, about 170 brewers' barrels. And once we've collected all of it, we take it up to a boil, and we're going to boil it for about an hour and a half. We're going to boil that sugary material. We're going to sterilize it. We're going to concentrate it in terms of sugar concentration because we'll evaporate some water. And as we evaporate the water, of course, we're concentrating the level of sugar in the wort. We're also going to add our hops here. You know, hops give the kind of the spice and slight bitterness to beer. And the majority of hops we would add at the beginning of the boil. They're called the bittering hops, and then we'd also add some towards the end for that nice spicy fruity aroma that we associate so much with beer. So 90 minutes in here, good strong rolling boil at about 215 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we've got to separate out the hops from the hopped wort, as it's known now. And we do that using a whirlpool separator upstairs on the second floor.
So start to finish, how long does this process take?
We're looking at roughly 7 to 9 hours depending on the brand. So brews that require more sugar, like a Maibach, they require more malt. It takes longer then to collect all of that sugary solution from the lauter tun into the kettle here. But an extra pale ale, our flagship beer, we can run through the system in about 7 hours.
All right.
It's a pretty efficient way of basically reclaiming that sugar, that extract, and moving on to the next brew.
And I noticed that there's a lot of copper in these two rooms. Is that something that's really typical for a lot of breweries?
Traditionally it always was. Copper is a wonderful conductor of heat. Also, there are some trace elements like zinc and magnesium in the copper that are really good for yeast nutrition. And we'll talk about yeast more on the cold side here in a few minutes. But nowadays, unfortunately, copper is becoming more and more expensive. It's becoming more rare to find. It's also harder to find folks who have experience welding and working with copper. So nowadays, you'll see a lot more stainless steel, especially in the newer craft breweries. Stainless steel doesn't conduct heat nearly as well, but maybe a little easier to clean. To me, it looks a little bit more sterile. I kind of like the copper. It's you know, it's traditional. It's got a lot of heritage associated with it, and I just like that kind of nice sheen that comes off a shiny copper brew house.
Absolutely, it has a lot of character.
It's got a lot of character, yeah. This brew house was built in 1971, brought over in 1996, and installed for opening day in 1998. It was originally used by a traditional German brewery for quite a number of decades.
Very nice. Well, should we head over to the other side?
Yeah, let's wander back to the cold side. We'll talk about the magic of brewing. That's the process of fermentation and the addition of yeast. So, sounds great.
Let's go check it out. All right, Damien, we have moved into the fermentation room. It's very interesting. What can you tell us about what goes on in here?
Well, we were just in the hot side of the brewery, talking about mashing and boiling and lautering. Now we're in the cold side, and this is really where the magic of brewing takes place. This is where fermentation occurs. And simply put, that's just the addition of yeast to that wort that was created on the hot side. And that yeast, when it comes in contact with the sugars in the wort, turns those sugars into alcohol, carbon dioxide, which provides the sparkle in our beer, and also some important flavor elements and compounds. And that whole process of fermentation takes place in these fermentation vessels that are right behind us. These tanks hold about 11,000 gallons of fermenting beer. It takes about 6 days for that fermentation process to occur. We start out with the wort being about 12% sugar.
Yep.
We end up after fermentation with only about 2% sugar left in the brew. But as the level of sugar has come down, the level of alcohol has gone up. So for an extra pale ale, our flagship beer, we go from 12% sugar to 2% sugar. We end up with about 5% alcohol in the final brew. So residency time is about 2 weeks for a pale ale. You know, we'll move through the system fairly quickly. After that, we'll need to remove the yeast. The yeast has done its job. It's time to get it out of there. And we'll do that using a centrifuge to spin out the yeast. After the beer has been filtered, it's now nice and bright. And we'll move it into one of these big tanks right behind us. These are called bright beer tanks. Bright beer just means filtered, clear beer, just an old brewer's term. And that's pretty much it for this room. Once the beer is filtered and bright, it's carbonated, it's all ready to go, it's nice and cold. The packaging team will come in, hook up to the base of the tank, and they'll start either kegging the beer or bottling, depending on what the day calls for. So maybe we should wander back to packaging. We'll take a look at our filler and also our keg racker.
All right, sounds good.
Right through these doors here.
All right, and now, Damien, we are in the packaging room. Can you tell us a little bit about what happens in here?
Sure. Well, after we've finished filtering our beer, we've got it nice and bright, nice and clear. We need to obviously put it into something for the consumer to drink. So in this hall, we basically bottle and we also keg. So behind us today, you can see the rotary filler. Beer literally comes in via a pipe from the cold side, from those big bright tanks that we just talked about. We feed the beer into the top of the filler, and then we start filling those bottles. We fill about 450 bottles a minute. This thing really can move. And then also, kind of the key back here is that all of these machines have to be talking to each other and working in tandem. So as soon as the bottles come out of that filler, they go right through our labeler right here. The label is put on the front of the bottle and also on the neck. And then they move down this series of conveyors down to the 12-pack and the 6-pack erector. That's where they're put in those cardboard boxes, and then they're eventually shrink wrapped and moved back to the cooler. So we really try to do a good job in terms of ensuring that this area is very clean, and also keeping the amount of oxygen in the beer to a minimum. Oxygen, light, and heat destroy beer. They really destroy the flavor and the aroma of beer. So we have a specialized evacuation system on our filler that moves all of the oxygen out of the bottle and ensures that there's very little oxygen left to break down our beer. We also do a little bit of keg racking back here. Approximately 55% of Summit's beer is sold on draft, so kegs are a very important part of our packaging operation. And we'll roughly keg about one standard half barrel a minute, so about 60 kegs an hour. And the lads will do anywhere between 700 and 900 kegs a day. Typically, a run here on the packaging line is about 4,000 to 6,000 cases a day. So we're moving a fair amount of beer through the system on this line. So perhaps wander back to the cooler and take a look at the finished goods area.
Absolutely.
Take a look at all of that packaged beer, and we'll also check out our hops.
All right, Damien, we are at the final stage here in the beer cooler. What can you tell me about this room here?
Well, it's a wee bit fresh in here. This room is held at about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. All of our packaged beer is kept cold to ensure freshness and ensure that the beer tastes as good as possible for as long as possible. We've got about a day's worth of inventory in here right now. You can see right here we've got a lot of packaged beer, 12 packs and 6 packs of extra pale ale. Also, this is where we store all of our kegs, all of our racked beer. And this is usually just a hive of activity. We have forklift trucks coming in and out all the time. When the beer comes off the packaging line, it normally comes right into this staging cooler right here. And then there are a number of big semi-trucks parked out back, and the forklift drivers will literally come in, pick up a pallet, load them right into the back of the truck, and then off it goes in that refrigerated truck over to the distributor, where it's held in another cold room, and then eventually heads out to a liquor store like Lakeville Liquors. We have a quarantine period in this room that if beer is in here for anything more than about 30 days, we don't allow it to go out into the trade because we're not happy with the quality of the freshness of the beer. But we're constantly turning over the beer in this room. It's a hive of activity. Pretty quiet today, though.
Right, so from the first room we started in to, the whole process and being stored in here, what is the total length of time?
It really depends on the type of beer that we're talking about, but for our flagship beer, the Extra Pale Ale, it takes roughly 18 days to get from the intake of malting barley on the hot side all the way to moving these cases, these pallets of beer into the final truck. A lager beer might take twice as much time because, of course, lagers have to mature for a longer period of time than ales. But speaking of lagers and ales, you're almost out of pills and I'm almost out of my stout, so why don't we wander back to the bar here and wrap it up. All right, let's fill these glasses up here, Jody, and we're working with Extra Pale Ale here, the flagship of the fleet. So thanks very much for coming today.
Yeah, thanks for showing me around. So what can you tell us about the future of Summit Brewing?
Well, one of the most exciting things here in the short term is the impending arrival of our newest Unchained beer. The Unchained series, of course, is that brewer-driven series where each individual member of the brewing team gets to work with whatever ingredients they want and create a completely new craft or style of beer. The next entry is from brewer Gabe Smalley, and Gabe has decided to make a completely 100% organic beer. A lot of organic beers are roughly 95% organic. That satisfies the USDA certification process for organic beer, but they often don't have organically derived yeast because organic yeast is not really available. So Gabe has worked really hard to ensure that we have a process here at the brewery to create the organic yeast needed to go 100% across the board. And essentially it's a hoppy American pale ale with 100% organic ingredients. And that's going to be out here in March, or just around the corner.
That sounds delicious. So if there's people that wanted to come tour the facility, how would they go about doing that?
Well, we have free public tours on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we have 3 tours on a Saturday. And of course, our tap room now, because of the tap room bill, our tap room is open on Friday nights here. The Ratskeller is open to the public. That kicks off at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we wrap things up at about 8 in the evening. And that's been great because it's allowed us to occasionally create maybe a new one-off beer on the pilot system, just a couple of kegs at a time. Put those on the bar and let people give us some feedback, and maybe down the road we can turn that pilot beer into a production scale beer and get it out to the market. So taproom is a lot of fun. We usually have a lot of folks coming down here, maybe have a food truck outside, and pretty relaxed atmosphere, and just have a beer and talk to the brewers.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much. No, it's been a lot of fun, and Summit, I think, is in really good shape. We have, of course, our big expansion coming this summer, which will allow us to double capacity. So I think we're in really good shape for the years to come. Sláinte.